All right, so it's lovely to have you all here for this is our second lunch and learn, I believe. So it's quite exciting. What we're trying to do with these is bring topics that are a bit on the outskirts of sustainable design. And what we've been talking about at MESHWORK is really trying to be there, intersect in the built environment. So this is where we're bringing people from other aspects that you'll be dealing with in your companies onto the site and talking about their experiences. But what Ella's going to be talking about today is really, really interesting. So all of you, I'm sure, have heard of net zero and will be trying to reach it. And you've been thinking about offsets and all sorts, but what is really interesting here is what Ella's company is doing with Ecosulis is they're looking at turning rewilding into it being investable. So with all you guys, you're going to be having big chats about how you can get down to net zero as quickly as possible. I think an interesting aspect will be looking at how you could invest in rewilding and learning a little bit more about what rewilding is and how your finances could support it. But that's enough from me. I'm going to pass on to Ella. She's got a really cool presentation. It's going to be about 15 minutes long, so you have loads of time to eat your sandwiches later. But yeah, if you've got any questions, we probably will only have like a minute at the end to go through them. But yeah, you can always contact Ella at Ecosulis later. All right, Ella, over to you.
Great, thank you, Catherine. And thanks to MESHWORK for having me on your platform this lunch. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Can you see that all okay? Can't hear you, but I assume it's okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you so much, Catherine. And so yeah, my name's Ella. I work for Ecosulis, and our company mission is to accelerate global rewilding and all the benefits that come along with it. I know Jan Stannard from Heal Rewilding gave a fantastic presentation on kind of everything rewilding a few weeks ago. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview in this 15 minutes of kind of on rewilding, and importantly, the opportunity here to mobilise private capital for nature recovery, and how can we make rewilding investable to scale and accelerate global nature recovery. So rewilding seems to be entering this kind of academic and cultural mainstream at the moment. You can see like the exponential rise in academic papers about rewilding. It's kind of gathering momentum, and it's an approach that's been promoted as one of the best ways to address the current UN decade of ecosystem restoration. And now there seems to be this kind of rise of eco-optimism. And rewilding really signifies this shift to a new environmental narrative in conservation. It's kind of a shift away from this defensive focus on nature protection to a more proactive agenda of, ecosystem restoration. And it's really exciting being a young person in the sector, because there really is that feeling that we could be the first generation to leave the world in a better place than we found it. So I think this quote by Christopher Sandham really captures the essence of rewilding. It's all about these spaces of innovation and in conservation. It's about restoring ecosystem and natural ecosystem processes and functions, and generating wilder, more dynamic and diverse landscapes, often through the introduction of functional species such as large herbivores. And it's also about creating a healthier society by supporting healthier nature, promoting human well-being, creating economic opportunities, and building resilience to climate change. So rewilding is an approach to ecosystem restoration, and it has been promising for delivering what you've probably heard of, nature-based solutions. A rewilding approach to landscape management is guided by a number of scientific land management principles, and this slide is kind of a small overview of those principles. So you can see in the top left figure, we look to expand ecosystems on these three axes. We want to restore forms of natural disturbance, which is crucial for creating these kind of microhabitats and niche diversity. We want to allow organisms to disperse through the landscape, so in kind of more ecological connectivity. And we want to expand the trophic complexity of these ecosystems, which is often through dynamic interactions of guilds of large herbivores and vegetation, which as you can see on the bottom figure, kind of creates these messy mosaics and dynamic landscapes. And this is the forms the basis for biodiversity and abundance. So there's kind of 4 rewilding approaches that we can take. There's passive rewilding, which is withdrawing human management completely. Sometimes we need to assist the recovery of ecosystems because we might have forced them and shaped them so much to suit human needs, which might be kind of removing ecological barriers or restoring hydrology. And there's accelerated rewilding, which includes kind of active interventions such as tree planting and kind of accelerating and steering these ecosystem processes. And then there's pragmatic rewilding, which is all of the above, but to provide nature-based solutions and generate forms of social and economic value. So this is just a quick overview on how I see rewilding, how we see it at Ecosulis. And this is all great, and it would be great if landowners could just recover large areas of nature, but at the end of the day, rewilding needs land, and land is an asset, and that asset needs to generate some sort of value for someone. And if we want to scale and expand nature recovery, we need to find ways to generate forms of financial value and revenues to maintain and develop that land, and to create employment opportunities associated with that land. So how can we make rewilding investable, and how can we attract investment for the transition of that land into a more wild state, and invest in kind of human resources and infrastructure that we would need to make rewilding an enterprise? Currently in the UK, a big topic of conversation and concern for landowners is this massive decline in farming subsidies, the basic payment scheme, which is going to be phased out over the next few years, and then the environmental land management scheme, which is going to be phased in. So many landowners are concerned, a little bit worried, and are now looking to new enterprise opportunities and new revenue streams. So this schematic kind of illustrates the 3 buckets of revenue associated with rewilding. This bucket at the top comes from kind of classical farming produce. So there's kind of premium meats, premium markets for some of these associated with rewilding, such as premium wild meats. And then the bucket on the right is the revenue from kind of leisure activities, ecotourism, experiential recreation, and this has expanded massively from the staycation effect of COVID. And then the bucket on the left is revenues from payments for ecosystem services, and these can be 2 types: public payments for ecosystem services, which can come from either grant schemes such as tree planting schemes, and also the environmental land management scheme, which will pay farmers to manage their land to produce environmental public benefits, such as natural flood management. And then the second area, which I'm going to get into in a bit more detail, is this emerging market, is the private market for natural capital credits. Carbon credits you are probably familiar with, and also biodiversity credits that can be used with biodiversity net gain. There's also nitrate credits. And then at Ecosulis, we are currently developing a rewilding token. So we have a unique opportunity, as there's some huge drivers for nature recovery currently. There's COP26, the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, solving this link between the climate emergency and the nature emergency. There's a rise of environmental social governance interest and impact investing. There's that recognition that the focus on carbon and biodiversity alone actually ignores ecosystem processes. There's obviously new regulatory frameworks such as biodiversity net gain. And then there's a corporate demand and need to achieve net zero targets, become carbon neutral, climate neutral, offset the harm. But since the acknowledgement of the climate and biodiversity crisis, there's also a push and desire for a lot of corporations to not only become carbon neutral, climate neutral, but also become nature positive and contribute to societal values and reputational value. And there's also growing landowner desire to, as I said, to transition out of fixed agriculture and into nature-based value generation. So what do we need? We need nature positive goods that can be produced, traded and invested in. We need metrics that can convert ecosystem services into units. We need a solution for ecosystem enhancement or uplift. And we need units and credits based on direct data rather than proxy data or codes. And this is becoming even more possible thanks to advances in technology such as environmental sensors, drones, remote sensing. And then we need a supply of investment projects of sufficient financial scale. So at Ecosulis, we have been developing a rewilding token, and this is our solution, I guess. It's based on a percentage uplift in the ecosystem integrity of a land holding. And this is evidenced by an index measuring 5 dimensions of ecosystem function. And then there's also a biodiversity quality credit, which is based on a percentage uplift in species diversity. So this just shows credits and tokens compared. As I mentioned before, credits are often associated with offsetting harm. Tokens, however, can be considered a recognition of contribution to nature recovery. So there's that storification value. There's more of a positive story which can improve public relations. There's pride, legacy building, strategic HR. And this enables the development of delivery of nature-based solutions, ecosystem services, not just carbon and biodiversity alone, but building ecosystem resilience. With credits, so for example, if you're going to go for carbon credits, you could be kind of managing your land to maximize those carbon credits, which might result in plantation carbon forestry. And this is a very static, standardized habitat, and it's not resilient or dynamic, and the ecosystem isn't kind of fully functioning. But actually, peatlands, wetlands, grasslands all sequester carbon. So what we really need to be doing and focusing on is the underlying ecosystem asset. And if we focus on restoring these crucial ecosystem processes, all the benefits will come from that. So an ecosystem is all of these interactions between different components, and these interactions can produce emergent properties. And some of these emergent properties or ecosystem outputs, as you can see in yellow, such as carbon sequestration and the emergence of biological abundance, these emergent outputs we can use for offset credits. But then we can have a token as well, which I've already mentioned, which looks at the underlying state of the land asset, which is in blue on this diagram. And we have a set of ecosystem indicators based on rewilding science, which can baseline the state of the ecosystem and model the uplift or improvements of the interactions and functions in an ecosystem and land management practices. So this will give people or corporations the opportunity to invest in the improvements of the underlying ecosystem asset. And this recognises that investors want measures of actually what's going on. They want actual metrics that can be tracked and reported. So the token is a digital asset which represents a verified stake in a land asset that has committed to a set of land management practices that will lead to the recovery of kind of ecological integrity. And once we've identified the assets present and what the kind of inputs and outputs will be and the effect of this on the integrity of the ecosystem and what commitments can be built into it, we can then feed this into an investment prospectus. And the quality of the data inputs can determine the confidence levels in the uplift of the ecosystem processes. One of the main issues or questions, I guess, is, should we be monetizing nature recovery? But the way I see it is this is kind of how the world works, and we're all focused on the same outcome, which is reversing the climate and biodiversity crisis. And I, personally believe that this is one way that can help us scale nature recovery rapidly. Yeah, oh gosh, I really went through that quickly. But yeah, thank you very much for listening and joining this Lunch and Learn, and I hope you maybe learned something.
No, that was really interesting, Ella, and for everyone on the call, I do urge you, when you're looking at offsetting, looking at these other avenues you can go down, so the rewilding, Ecosulis, and then with hill rewilding as well, and looking at like Nep Estate, these other land areas that are doing so much to really support the ecosystems we have in this country. But yeah, I mean, I found it really fascinating. I hope everyone really enjoyed it. If you've got any questions, we've got about a minute, but if not, and you would like to get in contact with Ella Ecosulis, there you go, Richard.
So if we get into these conversations with our clients about rewilding, fundamentally, what they're going to ask is, when we're looking at net zero, for example, is, okay, what, depending on the four approaches, is what is it going to cost me per hectare, and what carbon offsetting is it going to give me? Because that's kind of going to be their bottom line, really. And I'm just wondering whether there's kind of, if you like, a bandwidth for each approach for it per hectare. It says, well, if you take approach 1, you'll get somewhere between, it'll cost you somewhere between A and B, and the carbon offsetting will be between C and D, just as a, so they get that initial view of its value, really.
Yeah, definitely. It's currently what we're working on, modelling that, but it's difficult because obviously every single site is so unique, and we would recommend probably a slightly different approach depending on the site, really, because some sites have been, or some kind of land holdings have been so, you know, battered over the years, but with humans, they're definitely going to need kind of a more accelerated approach, whereas other areas it would be a lot easier to just kind of do kind of passive rewilding, which would be cheaper because obviously you don't have to do much. But yeah, we're currently working on kind of modelling and forecasting that. Yeah.